Hey there, everybody. Today I wanted to go into tuples. It sounds like a lot of people have been wondering why we use tuples and what is the reason for them. So a lot of people like to use this when it comes to machine learning or when it comes to trying to combine some data. So I'm going to go over some of those things with you today. So a tuple is a lot like a list. Okay, so we can have, let's say, letters here, and I'll set that equal to, so tuple will have these parens right here. So if you have a list, of course it's the square brackets, but we're going to use parentheses here. So inside I can store anything I'd like, just like a list. So I can say A, B, and C. And so now if I print letters, you see down here, just prints out the tuple there, okay? And the thing that programmers really like about tuples is that they are unchangeable and they're a little bit easier to read. When you're trying to store data, a lot of people like to use tuples like a dictionary without having the key value, because the dictionary will have a key and a value paired to it. Sometimes they use this as the alternative, so that's a little bit easier to read. So up to you. So let's go into a example. Okay, so let's say that I have, let's say, one of my YouTube videos. So I can say something like YouTube description or something like that. Okay. And if we go over to my YouTube channel, now I can look at my video description here, okay? And you can see that it has stuff like, well, here's my YouTube name, here's my description. I've also got some hashtags here. So let's kind of include some of that stuff into my tuple here, okay? So I'll define my tuple. And I'll have, let's say, maybe the title of the video. Okay. And that title, instead of saying its title, I'm just going to say how to code in Python. Okay. Next, I'll have like a video description, like in this tutorial, I will teach yada, yada, yada. That can be really long. And then I'll just have a couple of hashtags here. Okay, so I can have hashtag Python. And if I want multiple of them, I can even put another tuple in here, or a list, up to you. And I'll do another hashtag beginners or something. Okay, so here's a tuple, and just to make sure that I don't have any syntax errors, I'm going to print my YouTube description. Hit run, and looks like everything's working just fine. Okay, so, well, what if I want to print some of this data out? Well, we can simply use it as if we're using a list. If you could remember how to loop through a list or how to query a list, it's going to be a lot like that. Okay, so if I wanted to do like a for loop, so you do for, you say item in YouTube discount or description, print that item. That's how we would do it in a list. And I put in this comma by accident, so make sure you take that out. Okay, and now if I look down here, you can see it printed each item. So I have my title here, how to code in Python, my description, and my hashtags, my tuple of hashtags. So that works just like a list. So if I change this to a list instead of a tuple, you can see that it did the exact same thing. Now, if I wanted to assign each of these values into a single, into its own variable, so I can say something like, I want my title here, and I want to do YouTube description at 0. Okay, and I can print that title. You can see that it says how to code in Python, so that's my title. And I can do the same thing for my description and make sure it's at index 1, so 0, 1. Okay. Cool, and that worked when I hit run. And now I can say my hashtags, hash tags, and that's at 0, 1, 2. So index 2. And there's hashtags there. Okay. And that prints out just fine. So this is also going to work in a list, but let's get to the point I was trying to get at. So let's say that I wanted to use the method unpacking. So I can name all my variables all in one line and assign them. And I can just say title, description, as well as the hash tags here. And I can say that is just equal to YouTube description. Okay, so if I hit run, you can see that my hashtag still works. Title should still work. It does. And then finally, we will try description, which still works. Okay, so what this is doing is that it will look at this position, which is at index 0. So it will go to index 0 here and assign it index 1 and index 2. Okay, so that works and it's cool. But the thing is that we don't want this to change. Okay, so if we had this in a list and we did some altering to it, let's say that we wanted to, so a list can have multiple methods, and one of them is sort, so that you can sort it into alphabetical order if you wanted to. So you just say the list name dot sort. And let's comment this out. And if I hit run and try to print it, oh, and it says that it doesn't work with tuples. So let me, and then I'll get rid of these for now because it's going to give it some weird errors. But if I try to sort this out, you can see that it tries to do an alphabetical order. But so let's say that we're trying to now. We've got more values now, so I'll say hashtags 1 and hashtags 2. Okay, now if I do that, you can see that my title is no longer how to code in Python, because when we sorted this out, it took these values and it put it at the beginning, because in alphabetical order, it's taken some different values that counts it as greater than these values over here. And so now it's assigning it to the wrong one. So let's check another one. Let's check like my hashtags 1. And if I do that, you can see that it says how to code in Python. Well, how to code in Python is actually my title, and it's not hashtags 1. So that's why we want to use tuples in these cases, because I don't want my data to be sorted. In fact, when a developer creates a tuple, it's a sign to the reader of the code that, hey, you should actually be securing this data. I don't want this to be changeable. I want it to stay the same. You can see that when I change these back into a tuple and I do this, it's going to say tuple object has no attribute called sort, as in we can't sort a tuple. We can sort a list, but not a tuple. Okay, and so that's one reason why we would want to use those. Okay, and so let's talk about how we can add to a tuple, because, well, we usually have a function where we can append items. So if I turn this back into a list again, sorry, I keep going back and forth, but if I say my list.append and I want to append another item, I can say, let's say I wanted to add in my likes. So if I had like 100 likes on that video or something like that, and I can say likes, and then I try to print, I can just print my YouTube description. Okay, and so you can see that it did add it to it just fine. So there's my 100 likes right there. But if I had this in a tuple, it's going to say tuple object has no attribute append, because that is only for lists, not for tuples. Okay, and so another reason why we want to use a tuple, if we don't want anything to be manipulated, we don't want things to be added to or taken away. Even if I did the remove function where I wanted to remove it, it's not going to do it because tuple object has no attribute of remove, so that doesn't exist. Cool. So there are some instances where we do want to dynamically add something to a tuple, and we can in fact do that. So it's not going to be the append method, and we don't have any functions to add to it. But what we can do is that we can override it. And so we can just rename YouTube discount, or description, sorry, I keep saying discount. And I can say, I want YouTube description to be equal to whatever the YouTube description is, plus a tuple, because I want to add an item to a tuple. I want to say hi there or something. Okay, and now if I print YouTube description, you can say, well, look at this. It says we can only concatenate tuple, not strings to a tuple. Well, it thinks that we are just adding, trying to use math here, because it sees our code sees the plus sign, it sees parentheses, so it's trying to run PEMDAS. So what we need to do is add a comma. And what happens is that that little comma is actually telling our code that, hey, this is actually not a math problem. This is a tuple that we're trying to append to what already exists. So I can actually do this a more simpler way. I can say plus equals hi there, and make sure it's surrounded by the parentheses, and you've got a comma after whatever you're trying to add there. Okay, and that should work just the same. It does. Perfect. Now, what if I want to remove an item? Well, we tried to do YouTube description.remove, and it didn't work because that was only for the list, right? And so this one's kind of tricky. It's not a very common thing to do, mostly because it's a little bit messy, and we want to use the Zen of Python. We want to be pretty with our code. We want things to make sense and not be too complex, right? But if we had to, we can just simply convert it to a list, and then we can convert it back into a tuple. And so I will show you just how we can do that. So we can just do what we did before, where we rename the variable, and I can just say, I want you to take this YouTube list and convert it to a list. So I can just say list and then YouTube description. Okay, and now if I call it, it will print into a list. So now I know it's a list. Now that's a list, I can go ahead and either add or remove an item. Now I can take YouTube description dot remove, right? Remove, and I just want to remove, let's say, how to code in Python. I can test that, and you can see right here that how to code in Python was removed. Okay, and so now that I know that's been removed, I can just say YouTube description is now equal to a tuple version of YouTube. Okay, and now you can see that yes, it is a tuple now, and yes, it did remove it. Okay, so that worked really well. So that is how you can manually take away an item as well as adding an item. And if you did want to sort them, you can use the same method where you convert it to a list, do whatever the method is you want to do, and then convert it back to a tuple. But again, the reason why people use tuples is that so you don't have to change them. So if you do want to have your data to be changed and sortable, then just go ahead and use a list. But if you don't want it to, then go ahead and just use a tuple. Now there's one more subject that everyone wanted me to go over, and that was how to combine these things together. And we can just simply use a zip method that is used for tuples. And so a zip will it's kind of like a zipper. So if you imagine zipping up your jacket, you have one side of your jacket and you have the other side of your jacket. And once you zip, those forks come together all in one, like a list. And so the way that we can do that, so if we have, let's say, this YouTube description here, and let's have maybe some, I'll call this keys. So I can use this with a list or a tuple. So I can have, let's say, title, description, and then I'll have my hashtags. And let's see if this will work if I combine these again. Okay, and so I have those two. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So just making sure I have the same amount in each tuple. So now I can say combined description, and I will use the zip function like I said before. And what do I want to zip together? I want to zip together my keys and my YouTube description. And then I want to print my combined description. And then notice that it prints something weird. It just says the zip object, okay? And I don't want that. I want it to be something. And what the code wants us to do is that we want to tell it what to become. We want this to become a list of data, okay? And so now you can see that I have my title and my title right here, and that's all in one tuple, okay? Because this is a tuple. And then it has comma, and the second item in the list is description, which has been paired and zipped together with this second index here. And then we have my hashtags, which has been put together right there. So I can put that into the list, or I can put this into a tuple like so. And so everything's in a tuple now, okay? And so that is the basics of tuples. If you have any questions at all, please let me know down in the comments. I hope that this has been helpful for you. If you do have any requests for my next tutorial, please let me know down in the comments. If you do like these videos, please go ahead and like and subscribe so that you are notified for when I come out with my next tutorial. Thank you guys so much, and happy coding.